Okay, this panel is View from the Inside. You'll notice in the program that this is immediately followed by View from the Outside. Panelists have been asked, these panelists, of course, all represent zoos, and they have been asked to share their perspectives on the question, to what degree do zoos and aquariums operate from a foundation of animal welfare? I will do a quick introduction of the panelists. As in the other moderated sessions we've done, they will each provide their perspectives, and then we will do Q&A. If people have questions as they talk, please get them in. We have, to my right, Doug Kress, who is CEO of WAZA and has been for many years, or a week. It's one of the two. Dr. Megan Ross is Executive Vice President of the Lincoln Park Zoo. Sorry, they didn't sit in the order I have them on paper. Dr. Scott Terrell, Director of Animals and Science at Walt Disney Parks and Resort, now I'm back on track. And Simon Tong, Executive Director of the Southwestern Environmental Parks and Paignton Zoo. So, any particular order you guys want to go in? Can we just start with you, Doug?
Thank you very much. Yes, I have not been the director of WAZA for years. It's been about 13 minutes. So I'm on a learning curve, and it's very steep. But it is great to be the CEO of WAZA, and I have been incredibly impressed and honored to be impressed by what I've seen here and honored to be among you. I think both the zoo and aquarium world and the animal welfare world have a tremendous amount to offer, have huge obstacles before them, but each of them is not the enemy of the other. There's way too much collaboration that has been done and that will be done. I'd like to just say, based on the question we were given, are zoos and aquariums founded on animal welfare standards? And there's a couple of ways to answer that. Yes, they should be, but the reality is probably very different. Certainly all the zoos, the 300-plus zoos and aquariums that are in WAZA, have animal welfare standards they must abide by. But standards are difficult, and standards and opinions about welfare are difficult. And sometimes some of the better zoos and aquariums and some of the lesser zoos and aquariums don't meet at the same place. I have learned very quickly within WAZA that really the problem is not the accredited zoos in North America, Europe, or elsewhere. It's the thousands and thousands of zoos that are not accredited, the roadside zoos, the ad hoc zoos elsewhere in the world. I've also learned that those zoos drag the entire industry down, those zoos and aquariums, drag the entire industry down, but that doesn't matter to the general public. They don't really care if you've been accredited or not, and that's why I get 15 emails a day about welfare standards at some roadside zoo somewhere in the world, and we're expected to address those. I would also like to say that in my previous career, or my previous positions before this, I worked a great deal with great apes and primates in rehabilitation and rescue centers and sanctuaries across Africa and Asia. What I find amazing about that compared to this is the partners in many of those situations were zoos and welfare groups. Dozens and dozens of zoos and dozens of welfare groups worked very hard to save gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans, and we put them in sanctuaries that we were so thrilled to have been able to construct and to manage, and yet none of them would meet the welfare standards of the zoos that we're talking about here. So how come it was okay to work together, side by side, and meet a level that wasn't up to the welfare standards that you're holding everybody else to now, or that we're talking about now? So why did the rules change between in situ areas and ex situ areas? I think that's where we start to say perhaps we need to find other ways to communicate with each other. When I came into WAZA, I was thrilled to find that we had an animal welfare strategy. It was the product of 2 years of work between zoos and animal welfare groups. And actually one of the recommendations in the strategy, which is right here, is that zoos and welfare groups should work together. What is a little unnerving is it was published in 2015. Here we are in 2017. It took 2 years to create it. It's already 4 years since we began to think about some of these ideas. And the world changes in a matter of seconds these days. So I hope that this strategy, which is the underpinning of how zoos and aquariums around the world should be judged, can be a living document that is consistently and constantly updated. It has to. But it also has to go into practice. And one of the first things I'll be doing now that I've joined WAZA is hiring a permanent animal welfare coordinator. We don't have one on staff. We need one. That is a position that has to be a full-time, 24/7 job that a man or woman and a staff takes on to ensure that these welfare issues don't hold us back. As Carl just said in his talk, Rome is burning. We have a lot of things to do. We cannot be arguing over small details that could easily be moved aside.
Before we go to Scott, I'd like to follow up a little bit on one thing that Doug mentioned and that others have talked about, and that is this issue of good zoos, bad zoos. When we talk about zoos here, we tend to say accredited zoos when we're talking about zoos in the States, to make it very clear that we are talking about a tiny fraction of zoos who are meeting accreditation standards. I'm not quite sure how we do that in WAZA, but maybe what we are referring to here is not all zoos, but what we're referring to is those zoos who are accredited and or WAZA members. Does that make sense? Does that seem like a clear way to do this? Okay, Scott, would you like to go next?
So Megan and I had planned this. She was going to go first, but I'll jump in ahead of her.
You know, I am so not at issue with control. You do whatever you want.
I was going to start with the perspective that Scott just shared. Is when I speak about from the inside perspective of zoos, I'm really speaking from the perspective of accredited zoos. And for me, I went back to really look at the question that was asked of us, and is animal welfare the foundation of what we as accredited zoos do? And to quote our German colleague from yesterday, I think that question's absurd, because I think absolutely it is. And the reason why I think so passionately and is because if you really look at why we exist as accredited zoos, we are institutions that truly believe in making the world a better place for animals, for nature, for people. How we do that, really the people that do that work, our zookeepers, our scientists, our veterinarians, you look at the passion, the care, the expertise, the intensity of effort that they give every day on the inside of those zoos to do the right thing. Absolutely, we start from a foundation of welfare. Doesn't mean we can't be better. But when you look from an insider's perspective, we make dozens, if not hundreds, of welfare decisions every day. And I think we need to recognize that we as accredited zoos should be empowering our staff, our frontline keepers, our leaders, to make those decisions. And I happen to have an example pop into my phone just this morning. We have a family of otters, and we have three triplets that were born about 6 months ago. Well, just yesterday, Mom had a second litter, and Mom and Dad and new kids were inside the holding area, and the triplets that are 6 months old were outside. And we had 30,000 people in our park. And the triplets, the 6 months old, wanted to get in to see their new siblings. They wanted to get in to see their new brothers and sisters. And I got an email from my team that says, "Hey, Dr. Scott, just so you know, the otters are off show today because we opened the door so they could go visit their sisters and brothers." They didn't ask my permission. They didn't go through a welfare process. They made the right decision. Okay? And that makes me proud as a leader. It makes me proud as a member of this profession. But that's just one example of the dozens or hundreds of decisions that are made inside zoos every day. So I think our foundation is strong, but I do think, and I think what we've learned in the course of these last 2 days is our building above that foundation could absolutely be stronger, could absolutely be improved. And again, the company I work for, you can't go to a talk by a Disney employee and not hear a quote from Walt Disney. Walt Disney said, "You need to create a climate of dissatisfaction." Okay, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that we create a climate of dissatisfaction, that we could always be better at what we're doing. We could always do better from the context of animal welfare, animal care. And I think practical solutions of training and tools and communication strategies and leadership support, tangible tools that we could use to make sure we're ever improving that, is really what is most valuable to us inside the zoo.
I'm up. Okay, so I am going to build a little bit on what Scott said, and then I'm going to challenge a little bit of what Scott said all at the same time. So I agree with the Walt Disney sentiment that we need to get better every single day and be dissatisfied with where we are, because we care for living creatures and we're learning more about them all the time, and so we need to adjust to that. And I think that animal care is fundamental to who we are. We have animals, we are providing care for them. But as we know, welfare is an individual perception of their environment. So what I usually say is animal care is what we give to them, and animal welfare is what is happening inside of them. And being able to figure out what is happening inside of them is a huge commitment to try to figure out. And I think that what that commitment entails and all its complexity is something that maybe all zoos don't fully grasp at this point. Or I would say even I grasp at this point. I think this is a journey that we're all really trying to understand. So is animal welfare kind of the underpinnings of everything that people are doing? I think they want it to be, but you can care a lot and provide really bad welfare. If you think about private owners of chimps, if you ask them if they care about their chimpanzee, they would say that they care more about that chimpanzee than themselves. And so care and welfare are not the same. And I think that accredited zoos, because we're not talking about unaccredited zoos and roadside zoos, because we can all agree that those are not providing welfare. But even within accredited zoos, there's a gradation of zoos that are maybe a little bit lower. There's zoos that are kind of in the middle and really trying to get there. And then there are zoos that really are excelling. I mean, we've seen so many examples of zoos that are doing incredible work and really trying to get at understanding animals and how we can provide for them in a better way and how we can understand what's happening inside them in a better way. And so I think, I guess I would wrap up with just saying that I feel like we're on a journey, but I don't think that we're necessarily 100% there. And I feel like that's probably a good thing, because as soon as you get complacent, then you're not striving to be better. And I think that as Lincoln Park Zoo, I can say that's something that we talk about every day. How can we be better? If we're doing something that we don't think we should be doing, then we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do something that's better. And I think zoos have just such a unique opportunity to care for the animals that we have, understand the animals that we have, adjust to their needs on an individual basis, advocate for their species, conserve their species. And it's just such a privilege to be a part of a community that can do all of those things.
Thank you. Right. Okay, I just want to give a little bit of a perspective from the UK. I run 3 zoos in the south of the United Kingdom. We, like most of the zoos here, we have a structure of curators and keepers, all of whom are empowered to make animal management decisions, and we hire them because they are experts in the species that they're working with. In addition, we have, as many of you do, a fantastic conservation and education research department, and I'm delighted that some of the alumni of that department talked to us this morning, Sam Ward and Faye Clark. They used to work at one of our zoos. The European Association's welfare training officer, Sally Binding, is based in one of our offices, and the European Association's Animal Welfare Working Group Chair is one of our staff. So animal welfare is absolutely core and key to what we do as an organisation. What I'm going to say next is probably going to make me hated by pretty much everybody in the room. Bengt Holst is my hero. And if you don't know who Bengt Holst is, you better get on the internet pretty quick. I defended Bengt 3 years ago. I did my best to defend him. We do use management euthanasia, killing, as Mark would have me call it, which is fine. We do use that to manage our animal populations, and our view is that that is nothing to do with welfare. We can discuss that at some stage. I think I can speak for many of my fellow, certainly European zoo directors, because we think in the same sorts of ways. Not necessarily about euthanasia, but certainly in terms of placing animal welfare at the forefront of what it is that we do. There's an old TV series which many of you might remember called The Muppet Show. And The Muppet Show featured, and if you remember, it had a sort of auditorium like this with little, little balconies up there. And there were 2 old gits who sat there going, rubbish, and shouting it. I just invite you to look around and see if they... And the reason I draw attention to that is because I am one of those old gits. They are my tribe. They are my go-to guys. We talk all the time about animal welfare stuff, and they think about these things in the same sort of way as I do. So I fundamentally and passionately believe that we, as I'm talking here about accredited zoos, and we will go through any accreditation process that is offered to us. We are European Association accredited. We are British accredited. We have absolutely nothing to hide from anybody. We will talk openly about the practices that we do, and we do it with a self-critical approach. I think, taking Megan's point, we're never satisfied. We need to keep pushing the envelope and asking questions of ourselves. And just when we think we've reached the answers, then let's change the questions and move on again.
Okay. The moderator is going to get involved in the discussion at this point, because now that you've all spoken, I would like to get back to what Scott said and Megan responded to, and that is this issue of caring and how that does or doesn't manifest itself in welfare. I want to speak very quickly about what the Detroit Zoo learned and experienced using the model of human health care in the United States as a model. We have several physicians on our board who are helping lead, one of whom is the chair of our science committee. He's actually here. And using human health care as a model, because some of the leaders in the Henry Ford healthcare system here were part of leading revolution in American healthcare. I mean, the fundamental issue is people were going into the hospital and dying of things they didn't go into the hospital with. So clearly there were problems where there was great intention. No one intends to kill somebody in the hospital. And they were getting a lot of care. So clearly there was a disconnect. We see that as a real model for what zoos are doing. There is great intention, and I completely agree with both Megan and Scott on that. Our staff, like all staff in accredited zoos, are deeply caring individuals. But we know that doesn't result in great welfare. So I also agree with what Scott said. I think it's a great point that we have to be continually dissatisfied. If we're not self-critical, we're never going to change. And we all agree much more change is needed. I would like to hear response from the U.S. side to what Simon shared from the European perspective of management euthanasia, which is culling, and how that relates to how we demonstrate welfare.
I can't speak from a zoo specifically because I don't operate a zoo as my colleagues up here do. But from the outside in, this is the first time I've worked with zoo associations or zoos as an employee of this organization. It is clear to me that this body, this community, is somewhat stuck in the past. And part of it is that critical nature. We're incredibly hard on ourselves to a point that is almost debilitating. And some of it is temporal, and some of it is more in the head. But for instance, I don't know how many zoos and aquariums I've seen in the last few months and years probably that keep the old cages on the property. It's meant to remind you of the past as the paying public, but it serves as almost a haunting image. And the public doesn't like it. You're supposed to be able to say, "Look how bad it used to be. It's not that bad anymore." How about say, look how good we are? But it sits there and it's like a time bomb ticking on the campus of your zoos. And I think that's a very physical thing, but it also hangs over the shoulders it just hangs over as a cloud, I think, of this community a lot. This isn't 1974 anymore. We've moved on. We really have. And I think being critical in a forward-thinking way, in a positive way, is going to get us a lot further than trying to compare ourselves with what we used to be, because this is the 21st century now.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I would like, again, to ask one of the panelists to respond to a perspective that is different, and a perspective and an approach that was not supported by AZA. Scott or Megan, would you like to speak to that?
Hey, this wasn't in the agenda. As a scientist, which is where I often start my thoughts, the statement that euthanasia or death has nothing to do with welfare, I think, could be scientifically accurate, because at the point where life ceases to exist, welfare is no longer a factor. I think looking at it as a scientist, whether it's the presence or absence of welfare or population management or genetics, I can see the science behind it. But especially in the 18 years of my career in this profession, I also have to see the human side of it. And in the organization that I work for, knowing how important the trust in the brand of what I do is to my constituency, my customers, my guests, I have to really use that as my driving factor. I can't change the world like I want to do without the complete and utter trust and support of my guests. Even though I see the science and I understand the science behind the decisions that are made by our colleagues, I have to use this as my filter. And that's the best way I can explain my perspective on it.
And I would say it a little bit differently than you would say it. I think there's a lot of cultural differences, and I think that that's not something that can just be glossed over. So it's really challenging to make a lot of statements about different cultural norms as far as passing judgment. I think that's a challenge. Although I'm American, so probably I should be doing that because that's what we do. But what I would say is that one of the real gifts that zoos and aquariums have is that we care for individual animals. And one of the things that our public relies on us to do is to connect them with individuals. And I think one of the challenges from the perspective of being here in this culture, and I realize that it's different, but that's the agreement that I have with the animals that I care for, is that I am here to commit to their lifetime of care and making sure that I have a plan for them. So that is what I would say would be my initial responses on that. And again, it's just my perspective on it, yeah.
Thanks to both of you. I realize that put you both in a intellectually interesting place, sitting here on the stage. We got a question, which isn't a question, it's a statement, but I would like to stay on this topic for just a minute. We didn't answer the question that I asked, which is, Simon says, I'll bet you've never heard that before. Killing this animal has nothing to do with the welfare of that animal, if I understand that correctly. What I'd like to ask, and this is a statement, but it poses something, and I'm going to make a question out of whoever wrote this. Does it send a message about our attitude toward about the disposability of animals? And to that, I would add, does it in fact seem just a little bit expedient? Could we be seen as simply being expedient?
Sure, we could be seen like that, but you've got to do it in a context of openness and explain how populations work. I mean, I can't remember whose talk it was earlier, talking about how, whatever we do, I think it was Population Management Centre at St. Louis, talking about, whatever we do, these animal populations have a natural intrinsic rate of increase, and we are always going to be faced with population challenges. We're not saying that this is, the mantra that everybody must do it like this. We completely understand that Disney have a very different ethos and ethic, and a very different public that they have to carry with them. Bengt, of course, in Denmark, the ultra-rationalist country in the world, perhaps, he did it as part of the education and the placement of ethical and welfare issues in his, the Danish public, and it worked. Visitation to his zoo went up, his personal standing went up. So it's not as simple, you can see it as being expedient, but I would argue that it's actually a rational and natural, if you like, way of managing animal populations.
Go ahead, Doug.
In another previous career, I was a journalist for 20 years, and I can tell you, as much as that may be a rational decision inside this community, it is terrible optics for the general public. And I think that's something we have to always take into account. And I don't have any of the standing possible to argue this ethically with any of it up here on the stage. But from the outside, that decision, if not properly explained, and this community does not always explain itself as well as it thinks it does, can be devastating. And we have to take all of those factors into account, I think, when something that volatile is released.
Okay, this has taken us kind of away from our question about the degree to which we operate with welfare as a foundation. But I do want to, a second question that came in, will be the last thing we say on this topic. They requested each speaker respond to the question, what are your views regarding releasing necropsy and pathology information on animals that die?
Maybe the pathologist should answer that. So I am a veterinary pathologist by training. That's where I spent the first 12 years of my career in the zoo. The challenge with releasing postmortem information is one of the challenges is simply in interpretation, in accurate interpretation. We have challenges in our own profession of interpreting these very complex conclusions. I think that the public has a expectation based on television and movies that the answer happens in the course of a 55-minute television show, and it's always definitive and it's always black and white, and none of that's actually reality. So I very much come from a place where openness and honesty is almost always the best tool and the best thought. But I do worry that simply releasing, in this case, the results of a postmortem would either lead to confusion or misinterpretation. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I couldn't take that and interpret it and communicate. You know, as Doug said, we need to be better communicators. I think probably 95% of the time, a skilled communicator could take that information and convey it to the public in a way that would build trust and educate. But I do worry just the release of postmortem as a matter of fact is not a valuable tool.
Okay.
I guess from our perspective, I guess I don't really see what the problem is. Animals die. There's an explanation for it. If people are interested to know, then by and large, we're happy to tell them. I mean, of course, it comes in the context of finding the full information, and that might mean long periods of bacterial culturing or cell culturing or something like that. But we don't see the problem.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left. I am still wrestling with how we stay on topic here, because whether I just let go of our topic goal and we go rogue up here. We believe, I think by consensus, I think we all kind of agreed that accredited zoos and aquariums are operating from a foundation of animal welfare. I think we all agreed that we could have a stronger foundation, or we could have stronger execution on that foundation. I don't want to put words in people's mouths. What are the things we could be doing to build that? How do we advance it?
I think there's lots of different ways that we could be advancing it. I can speak on some of the ways that we've tried to from Lincoln Park Zoo's perspective. We've created tools, as many other institutions have. We've created tools that allow us to be able to collect behavior on animals so that we can have that information available to managers. It's free if anybody wants it, Zoo Monitor. We have been advocates for chimpanzee welfare with Project Chimp Care, where we have been trying to assess and understand animals in lots of different living situations in the U.S., in homes, in entertainment parks, at breeding facilities, in labs, in lots of different situations. We've been strong partners with many of the groups here to be advocates for species. I think you heard earlier from Steve Ross about some of the work that we did on advocacy work for chimpanzees. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can communicate how we care about the individual animals and how we are trying to better understand them. I think we can be conducting research at our institutions to be able to understand the mind and the feelings of the animals that are in our care. And so I think those are some of the ways that come to mind. I think those are just the tip of the iceberg, though. I'm sure there's lots of other ways that we can really help advance the animal welfare understanding.
I thought that was actually, if that was just the tip of the iceberg, I think it's a very accurate tip. Are there other things that any of the other panelists would add?
I mean, I would say I think the regional zoo associations have a massive role to play here in getting their accreditation systems in place and getting as many of their members properly and fully accredited as quickly as they can, and then proselytizing, taking that to parts of the world where there are no accreditation systems, and trying to take the old 80-20 rule. 20% of us are up here, and the other 80% are still here, and trying to get that other 80% up. And I think the accreditation systems and the support systems, we have a mentoring system within the European Association, and we provide mentors to candidate members to help them achieve the standards that we need to. And it works. We've actually got people all the way up from candidates with nothing right up to full membership of the association. And we're proud to have them in the association. But it's a lot of work, but we have to do it. It's a collective. We feel it's kind of a duty and an incumbence upon us, the leading progressive zoos, if you like.
I guess I would just go back for the point that I might emphasize, go back to the conversation that both Megan and Scott made around care doesn't necessarily equate to wellness. And so I think one of the first things that we can do is to improve the level of awareness and training and communication at our own institutions around welfare. What does welfare mean? What are the basics of welfare science? What are the basics of ways that we can improve it in our own institutions to be proactive with regard to animal welfare rather than reactive where we've been in the past. And so I would start, in addition to everything that Megan said, just to start with our own staffs and raising that awareness or raising that training and really raising the level of proactive focus on it on a day-to-day.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Yesterday morning, Jenny Gray had everybody stand up and shake hands or introduce yourself to the person next to you. It was a nice gesture, and it kind of warmed the room up. I would say keep doing it. I cannot believe that these two groups, these two communities, which have so much in common and so much overlap, continue to butt heads. These are dark times. I mean, in the real world, these are dark times. And we have to recognize that welfare of people is really a Western luxury, let alone animal welfare. And I think the sooner we realize that most of the world is not concerned with the issues we're talking about here, as sad as that might be, it'll be easier to find common ground and move forward, because I think we have to move quickly. There really is not as much time as we think.
Okay, that does wrap up our time. I apologize to those who posed questions that we did not get to, but I would like to thank all of the panelists. I think this was some pretty good discussion that we all got to witness.